Hi everyone, yes, que to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Fall is in the air and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make two delicious tsoureki for fall. So we're going to be making a pumpkin spice and a pear spice tsoureki filled bread. Tsoureki are Greek Easter breads that are sweet and light and fluffy, and they are made around Easter time every year in Greek households, but they're definitely a labor of love. They're not the easiest thing to make. They take a little bit of time and patience and effort, but if you follow my instructions, you'll make them perfectly. Today we're going to be spicing them up a little bit for fall. They're so good. The house is going to smell amazing. They're perfect if you want to serve them for a brunch or give them out as gifts, because who would not love the sweet bread as a gift? Anyway, let's get started. Okay, so the dough for both the pumpkin spice tsoureki and the pear spice tsoureki is exactly the same. With the pumpkin, all we're going to do is add some pumpkin puree to it, and that's it. So we're going to begin by making the starter. So in my tabletop mixer, I'll add half a cup of lukewarm milk, 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast, a teaspoon of granulated sugar, and 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Mix that all up and let it sit for about 8 minutes so it can proof. You'll know that the yeast is alive and well if it forms some bubbles and foam at the top, just like this. If this doesn't happen and if it's just flat, then the yeast has gone bad, and you'll want to get a fresh container of yeast so that way you can make this bread. Without it, it will not work. This is why you don't want to skip this step and throw everything in the mixer all together. So once that step is done, in another bowl, I have my dry ingredients. So I have 5 cups or 718 grams of all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour if you like, the zest of an orange, 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of powdered ginger, and I also have a teaspoon of ground mahlepi in here. You can leave it out if you don't like it, but that's the characteristic flavor of a Greek tsoureki. Whisk those ingredients all up, and now we'll add the remaining wet ingredients to the mixing bowl. So I'll add an additional 3/4 of a cup of lukewarm milk, a cup of granulated sugar, 2 eggs, a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, 1 cup of pure pumpkin puree. You can use fresh if you've roasted it yourself and mashed it, or from the can. You can use that too. And then 2 ounces of butter that's nice and soft. All of the dry ingredients are also going to go in here, and the dough hook attachment is on. We're just going to knead this on low speed for 10 to 12 minutes until the mixture comes together. This is a really soft mixture, and I think I'll just go in and add another cup of flour so that way it can hold together a little bit better, but it's still going to look pretty sticky. So transfer this to a bowl that's been greased with a little bit of olive oil. Toss the dough around in there so it's nice and coated, and then cover it with either some plastic wrap or a clean kitchen towel. Set it aside so it can rise until it's doubled in volume. You really want this to get nice and light, and if it doesn't double in volume, it'll be a really dense bread. So that's the secret. Set it aside and just let it rise low and slow. It should take about 2 hours to do that. In the meantime, you can make the dough for the apple tsoureki. And actually, if you're making both, it is a better idea to make the apple first, so that way you don't have to wash your mixing bowl or the hook, which will turn orange from the pumpkin puree. You do all the same things, except you leave out the pumpkin puree. If you want this to be a nice and moist dough, you can definitely puree some canned pears, a cup of them, and put them in here, and it'll be just as soft and sticky as the pumpkin dough. It's completely up to you. I didn't do that today. I'm just going to transfer it to my bowl that's been lightly greased and set it aside until it doubles in volume. This one is a little denser because it doesn't have that extra puree in it, so it will take much longer. It can take up to 3 hours to rise. Let that happen really nice and slowly so that way you get a really soft bread. So once the dough has risen, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and now it's time to make the filling. We'll begin with the pumpkin filling. So I have 1 stick of unsalted, really soft butter. I'll add to it a cup of brown sugar, the rest of the pumpkin puree that's in the can, that's about 3/4 of a cup, 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, half a teaspoon of ground ginger, half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves, and I'm just going to mix that all up until it's all combined just using the spatula over here. There are going to be little bits of butter, and it's not going to be a very smooth mixture, but that's not a problem because this will all melt in the oven once it starts to bake. So set that aside, and then you're going to take the pumpkin tsoureki and you're going to cut it into 2 equal portions. Set 1 portion aside, and if you're making braids out of this, cut one of the portions into 3 equal portions, and make sure you flour your surface really well because, like I said, this dough is very sticky and soft, so it's going to be a little bit harder to work with. So just carefully roll it out into about a 10 to 12 inch long rope. You don't want to go too long, otherwise it's just going to fall apart when you're going to start braiding it. Once you roll out the rope, press it down so that way you can flatten it out a little bit and you can have room for the filling. And we're going to take that pumpkin spice filling, spread it on one side of the dough, and then top it with either cranberries. You can do chocolate chips, you can do toasted chopped pecans. You can really do whatever your favorite dried fruit or nut is in here. Then fold the other side of the rope over just to cover the filling and pinch it together to seal it. That way the filling doesn't ooze out so much. Lightly roll it. If it's getting stuck to the counter, you can use the dough scraper to help it, and that should make it easier. And you could just lightly dust it with some flour, pick it up and set it aside, and do the same thing with the other two ropes. Then we're just going to connect them at the top and braid them really gently. Try not to stretch them out. This dough stretches really easily just because, like I said, it is a very soft, pliable dough because of the pumpkin puree that's in there. Carefully transfer it to your baking tray that's lined with parchment paper and cover it with a kitchen towel. Set it aside for about 15-20 minutes just so it can fluff up a little bit. You don't want this to sit out for too long, otherwise it'll flatten when it's gonna bake in the oven. So the other one, I'll just make a little simpler in using a bundt pan. I'll grease my bundt pan with a little bit of olive oil. You can use butter instead. And then I'm gonna roll this out into a flat rectangle, just as much as it can go. Add all of that remaining pumpkin spice filling on top, spread it out with an offset spatula, and then top it with your favorite dried fruit. I have a combination of cranberries and raisins here because I ran out of cranberries. I tested this recipe so much because so many things went wrong and I wanted to get it completely perfect for you so that when you're making it, you don't run into the same issues that I did. So top it with either raisins or cranberries or nuts, whatever you love. Chocolate chips are nice too. And then roll it up into a rope. At this point, you can cut this into rolls if you want and make little pumpkin spice cinnamon rolls. You would put them in a 9 by 13 inch baking pan, but I'm just gonna twist it a little bit and I'll put it into this bundt pan that's been lightly greased. I'll cover it with a clean kitchen towel and set it aside for about 20 minutes again, just until it rises a little bit and it's nice and puffy. Now that they're ready, I'm going to brush them with a little bit of egg wash. I just have some egg yolks here and a little bit of milk that I've whisked up into this little jar. I'll brush the Tsoureki braid and the other one with the egg wash, and then these are going to bake at 350 degrees on the center rack for about 40 to 45 minutes until they're nice and golden. Once they come out, you're going to want to let them sit for about 20 minutes before you cut into them, but the house is just going to smell incredible. We're going to do almost the same thing with the pear spice bread. I'm just going to braid both of them, and again, making the filling is the same exact recipe except it's missing the pumpkin puree. So 1 stick of unsalted butter, a cup of brown sugar, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of ginger, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. Mix that all up, and then I have a can of pears here that I've just drained really well. It's in light syrup. I've chopped the pears up into just small pieces and put them in a bowl. So we're going to do the same thing, cut the dough into 2 equal portions, and if you're making braids, each portion gets cut into 3 pieces. You're going to roll it out about 10 inches long and then flatten it out. Spread that cinnamon filling in there and then top it with the pears that have been chopped up. And then we're just going to braid these loaves up and put them on a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper. Since this dough is a little bit more dense than the pumpkin dough, it's going to take a little bit longer to rise. So you could set it aside to rise for about 30 to 40 minutes until it's a little bit fluffy. Then we're going to brush this with that egg wash, and this is going to bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes or until they're beautifully golden all around. So the house smells amazing. Once these come out of the oven, you want them to sit for about 15-20 minutes and rest and settle before you cut into them. So I've tested this recipe so many times just to make sure that I got it right. And I think I got it right this time, but I did keep the mistakes in the video so that way I can talk about them. The first mistake that happened. So I love to proof the dough in my dryer. Proofing the dough means when you put it to rise. Now, that is a very important step because that first rise, once you knead the dough and you put it in the grease bowl, you want it to double in volume. And rich doughs like this take a lot of time. So a dough like this can take up to 3 hours. The pumpkin spice dough is going to rise a little bit faster because it's much lighter. But the one that's a little bit denser, the pear spice dough, because it doesn't have the puree in there, it has more flour in it and it's a little bit of a heavier, denser dough. That can take all the way up to 3 hours. So I like to run my dryer with some towels in there, of course, clean towels and laundry. Make sure it's clean laundry. And once the dryer is nice and hot, after 10 minutes, I put the bowls in there covered. Make sure that the dryer is turned off. And that'll cut about 30 to 45 minutes of rising time. They rise much faster in there. I have tried methods that I've seen online where people say to turn the oven light on, put a steaming bowl of water in there. None of those ever worked for me. This works every single time. Then the second rise, after you braid them and you shape them, you also have to let them rise a little bit. Of course, the pumpkin bread, you don't have to let rise too much because it is, like I said, a stickier, lighter dough. So all it needs is 15 minutes at room temperature, not in the dryer, just to puff up a little bit, because when doughs are lighter and a little bit runnier, if you let them rise too much, then they flatten out, they spread when they bake. But doughs like the pear spice bread, which, like I said, are still a little bit drier and not as fluffy and denser, once you braid them, they're going to take about 45 minutes to rise. And what happened was I put it in my dryer and my dryer malfunctioned and decided to start spinning while the tray was in there. And the kids all thought that was the funniest thing ever. I panicked and every word came out of my mouth because I thought that it was ruined, but I somehow salvaged the bread and it looks okay still. But it didn't rise as long as it needed to, so it is a little bit denser. I'm still going to show it to you just so that way you could see that if that happens, hopefully you'll save it in time. And if your dryer isn't functioning right, don't even do the trick. Just let it happen low and slow because so much effort goes into this that you don't want it just to go down the drain. I was able to save it, but that was not going to be the case another time. So anyway, I still kept it in there to show you that it's not as fluffy as the pumpkin-filled bread, but it's still going to taste delicious. Let's do the taste test, and then we'll go over substitutions and other ways you can make this bread. So look at the pumpkin bread. It's so soft, it's fluffy. You have that cinnamon swirl going through the bread and those cranberries. It's going to be really good, I know it. So rich. It doesn't need anything. Of course, if you want to make it even better, you can make a cream cheese icing and drizzle it on top or dust it with some powdered sugar, but for me, it's perfect. And then take a look at the pear spice bread. You can see that it's not as light, and that's because it didn't rise as much. If that wouldn't have happened in the dryer, these would have been much fluffier, but they're still good. Trust me. These are not going to waste. So good. The flavor is perfect. It is a little bit dense, but we're still going to eat it. I like my tsoureki dense anyway, but it would have just been so much better, especially for food photography if I didn't do that. You don't have to use pears for this. You can use apples if you like. You can leave the pears out completely and the apples out completely and substitute nuts in there, like some toasted pecans or walnuts or something like that. Instead of cranberries, of course, you can use raisins. You can use chocolate chips. You can leave the cinnamon swirl out all completely and make this chocolate and do like a Nutella swirl in the center. There are so many options. And of course, you don't have to make them in the braids because they are a little bit more work. And like I did, that's why I showed you how to make it in the bundt pan, because it comes out delicious and it's less work. You can also turn these into cinnamon rolls. So instead of putting it in the bundt pan, once you roll it out, just cut the roll into slices, put them in a 9 by 13 inch baking pan, and drizzle about a tablespoon of heavy cream over each roll and let these bake until they're fully cooked. And they're going to be so delicious. I will leave a recipe for cream cheese icing if you want to add it to it on the blog post. I hope you guys give this recipe a try. I hope everything that I said makes sense, and I hope you understand what went wrong and what went right and how yours should look. But if you have any questions, post them down below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I'll see you all next time. Yes, us. It's good? Which one's better? The pear you like more? Okay.